Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stott and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today we're going to be talking about how the crazy communist micronations of the world are in fact quite crazy. So about 2 weeks ago, YouTube recommended one of my old videos to me, and this was called Stomaria is at War. Now in this video I highlighted about half a dozen or so micronations that declared war, investigations or embargoes or sanctions of some kind against Stomaria. Now, it won't surprise many to learn that none of these entities, as far as I'm aware, exist. They all folded, they all dissolved, they all went inactive or whatever else. And even when they were around, they still accomplished precisely nothing. And then they just faded into oblivion, which is the fate of a lot of micronations out there. But don't think for a minute that these half a dozen or so micronations that are making these declarations of war, investigations or embargoes or whatever else are unique or they're outliers. We get these sorts of declarations at least once a week on average. It's just part of the course. So since we were founded in 2019, 5 years of this going on at the rate that it has, we have racked up hundreds of these declarations. You just don't hear about it very much because we don't talk about it very much because it's not the least bit relevant to what we are and who we are, as many of you will well know. However, what we do like to do on occasion, and if you've been following us for any length of time, you'll know this, we like to insert some more playful videos into the mix from time to time, just to spice things up a bit. We always talk about Stomaria's development, its progress, our aspirations, how far we've come, and all of that jazz. But it is nice to mix it up a little bit now and again with something a bit more light-hearted, and the Stomaria is at War video was one such example. Now, originally, this was supposed to be one of those more light-hearted, playful videos where we would highlight some of the other micronations that have more recently declared these sorts of wars or investigations or embargoes or whatever else. Because, as a lot of people that follow us will know, we consider these sorts of things to be funny. They're a source of amusement for us. We don't take it seriously. Because any declaration of war from a micronation should be treated as it is, a pitiful, cringeworthy, pointless attempt to try to make a name for yourself by trying to suck us into some kind of weird petty drama that you want to stir up in order to justify your own existence. And if we leave them alone for 2 weeks without responding to it, which is the norm for us, that's what we normally do, they just dissolve. They go inactive because they get bored, because they can't do anything with us, so they just peter out and die a death. And this has happened many, many times over the years. And again, this is why you just don't see us talk about micronational war or conflict or whatever else, because the entities that engage in this sort of activity, they don't have a lifespan that goes beyond a few weeks or a few months. But we did think about highlighting some of the more recent examples of these declarations of war or embargoes or whatever else against Stomaria. Because again, we just see it as a source of entertainment and amusement, and it's been over 2 years at this point since we made that kind of video, and we thought it would be a good thing to do. However, since then, this video has taken on a different form, and that's because we came across, through a series of very peculiar events, we came across an ominous video which really highlighted for us something else that we have been talking about for some years. And this is something that I want to talk about a little later on, but it is the more important part of this video. But before we get into the meat of this video, I did want to highlight something else, because this is something that does come up from time to time, and I very nearly made an entire video dedicated to this singular point, because it is something that does come up with alarming frequency. When it comes to Stomaria, there is this perception that Stomaria has enemies. That is to say, it's normally other people that define themselves as enemies of Stomaria. Stomaria doesn't define itself the enemy of anything or anyone, in the sense that when we come across certain individuals or communities or micronations or whatever they define themselves as, they are normally consisting of internet trolls, of children, of disturbed teens, or middle-aged weirdos. These are not enemies of Stomaria. They are not a threat to Stomaria, and we do not consider them worthy of being defined as an enemy. Stomaria does not have enemies, pure and simple. Now, these days, the ones that try to define themselves as enemies of Stomaria are normally what I call commie kids. You know the sorts, the children or adolescents that go out there marching around in jackboots that would quite gladly identify and parade around as Nazis if they thought it was more socially acceptable, if there wasn't as much stigma around that. But because communism, for whatever reason, is more widely accepted within the micronational community at large, that's what they tend to settle with. But that is by no means always the case, in the sense that some will take that extra few steps and they'll just go full Nazi. And this is something that we will actually be discussing later on. But just before I get into the meat of that, the reason that I attract the ire of these particular individuals is because Stomaria is a beacon of libertarian values. That is to say, we are advocates of personal liberty and freedom. And this obviously stands in complete contrast to what the communist and neo-Nazi doctrine advocates for. And so naturally, when we criticize communism, neo-Nazism, fascism, and all these other sort of collectivist ideologies, this is something that does rub these sorts of people up the wrong way, because they take it very personally on that front. They don't see anything wrong with advocating for these sort of vile, oppressive, genocidal ideologies. And so obviously they are going to try to define themselves or position themselves as the enemy of Stomaria. Now, there have been a lot of recent examples of these pee-wee proletariats making these declarations of war or sending their threats or whatever through comments on our YouTube videos, sending us emails or sending us private messages or whatever else. But I did want to highlight one particular instance because, one, I think it was one of the funnier attempts at trying to intimidate or threaten us, but also it ties in very neatly with what I want to talk about later on in this video. So we have a couple of rugrat revolutionaries running a micronation called Pangaria, and it's very typical of a communist micronation, complete with Soviet-style anthems, shrines to Lenin, adolescents goose-stepping around their parents' back garden in ill-fitting uniforms, and of course, sending threats when they can't get their own way. Now, this merry band of baby Bolsheviks decided that it would be a good idea to start commenting on Stomaria's YouTube videos. However, in doing so, they quickly exposed their own ignorance about a doctrine which they actually apparently were advocating for. They clearly had no knowledge of what communism was, what it stood for, what the results or impact is for the lives of people that actually have to live under those sorts of regimes or lived under those regimes in the past. And so they decided, in their infinite wisdom, rather than continue to make themselves look like idiots in the public space, to delete all of the comments on our YouTube videos and instead sent us a private email. Now, in this email, they demanded that I apologize for making them look bad. They demanded that I apologize and then to debate them in an open and honest manner. Now, I had absolutely no intention of engaging in a private or public discourse with goose-stepping minors that had no knowledge of the subject matter in which they were trying to discuss with me. So I declined the opportunity. But that did not stop them from sending another 4 emails over the course of the following week. And in one of the emails that they sent, the last one that they said that if you did not agree to this public debate, or if I did not issue a public apology, then there would be proper consequences from the Pangarian Red Guard, and a declaration of hostilities would be signed. Basically the reaction you can expect from us, I'm afraid, on that front, when we get these sorts of threats. Now, it wasn't until about a week later that they actually upped the ante in some form, and they sent us yet another email, because we had ignored all the other emails that they sent us. We didn't reply or acknowledge them at all, but they sent us another one about a week later, which was this image. And I guess this is supposed to intimidate us in some shape or form, but as you can see, it's not exactly the most awe-inspiring image. In fact, the first thing that came to my mind when I saw it is that it looked like the woman, the figure that's supposed to be representing Pangaria tearing the flag of Stomaria. To me, it just looks like an inflatable adult toy. And so it wasn't especially intimidating from our own perspective. Now, this all happened towards the end of April and in early May this year. And it wasn't until a few days ago, so literally 2 months later, in which we actually heard anything more about it. Because unsurprisingly, we don't actually chase up, follow, or engage with these sorts of entities when they send these sorts of emails or comments on our posts or whatever else. We just don't care. Now, someone, as I say, found a clip from one of their videos in which they were declaring that Stomaria had threatened Pangaria, but never fear, because they had launched an offensive campaign against imperial aggression.
Unfortunately, Pangaria was threatened by the dictatorial nation of Stomaria. Great slurs and expressions of disrespect were thrown to Bulgaria's democratic government by the monarchical and undemocratic nation of Stomaria. Luckily, the Bulgarian people sided with the popular government and started an offensive campaign against this imperialist aggression from the outside.
And this was quite amusing because I can only assume that this offensive campaign which they were talking about was this inflatable adult toy image that they sent us in a private email, and then that was it. And apparently that was the offensive campaign which they're referring to. But that wasn't the main issue. When it comes to micronations, this is what they do. Micronations come up with fictional, fanciful events to create fictional, fanciful campaigns against people that barely know they exist. So that is not a surprise. That is not exactly exciting stuff. This is par of the course for the micronational community. Now, what was something that was worthy of my attention in the end, I didn't think it would be, but it was in the end, that on this video that they posted, which contained this little snippet, there was a comment from a communist micronation, the name of which I was familiar with. It had crossed my screen before, and I couldn't quite pin down where it was from, so I did a bit more investigation. And after a little bit more digging, I did realise that Stravonskin, this communist micronation, had previously, in perhaps 1 or 2 years past, had been banned from our YouTube channel, because, as a lot of micronations tend to do, they get a bit uppity on our channel and they start being a bit more combative, and it's just not worth our time responding to. So typically, we just ban them. Now, beyond this, I did also realise that this was the very same micronation that I had discussed with another micronation back in early 2022. So for context, there was a micronation called the Empire of Calypso, and this micronation was one that we were actually actively looking at establishing formal relations with, because this is back when Stomaria defined itself as a micronation, was building micronational alliances and all the rest of it. However, while we were having these conversations, Calypso announced that they had established formal relations with this communist micronation, with Stravonskin. And I said to the head of Calypso, the leader of the Calypso, the Emperor of Calypso, that this was really not a good idea. After a very brief search, you quickly discover that this communist micronation wasn't just communist, it was flat out Stalinist. And that obviously didn't sit right from my own perspective. And I could see exactly what this kind of entity would gradually turn into, because it had already taken all of the necessary steps in doing so. And I did say to Calypso, the Emperor of Calypso, this is not a good idea. I mean, you do you, but it's not going to work out in your favor, I promise you. Now, the talks with Calypso did eventually break down in the end. We broke off talks. We just didn't see any real tangible benefit in trying to engage with them in a formal capacity, which is why you've probably never heard of them. But I promise you, we get these sorts of applications all the time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds over the years, and you don't hear about 95% of them because they just don't reach that threshold in the end. And I think they have folded or gone defunct, as I understand it. They haven't posted anything on their social media accounts for well over 2 years at this point. So safe to say they've just joined the long list of micronations that have died a death, folded, dissolved, disbanded, gone inactive, whatever you want to call it. But that is just for context. That's just to say that I have come across this communist micronation before. Now, for all of that, there really wasn't anything interesting to talk about on that front. However, something that quickly caught my attention is that one of the more recent videos of this communist micronation highlighted something very important, something that I've been discussing for some years now. because I have been saying for the longest time that communism and neo-Nazism are two sides of the same coin. There is really not anything between them. They are both deplorable socio-political ideologies that revolve around collectivism, subservience to the state, the abolition of personal liberty, and the oppression of those who are problematic from their own perspective. The bottom line is that it doesn't matter all that much if the man that's putting a bullet in the back of your head is wearing a swastika armband or a hammer and sickle pin in his cap. I promise you, the result is very much the same. However, something that I did, again, want to reiterate is that I believe that communist micronations, many of them, would quite happily don the outfit, the uniform of Nazis if they thought there was less of a stigma attached to it. Because, as I say, there's virtually nothing from an ideological perspective that separates them. And when it comes to this particular video, or the snippets of this video that I'm about to show you, I don't know what could highlight this more. Here you have a self-defined communist micronation, a Stalinist micronation, and this is the head of that micronation. So here he comes, looking like an SS officer, and right off the bat, there's the Nazi salute. Well, maybe it was just a slip of the hand. Someone's been watching Hitler's speeches recently. Oh well, at least, oh no, never mind, he did again. Dear. Oh, and a third time. I wish you luck if your employers come across this video, young man. Now, for those who are watching, you'll probably be able to see that I have taken the liberty of blurring out this young man's face, because even though he's clearly old enough to know better, he obviously doesn't know better, because he has taken this footage of himself making a Nazi salute, posted it in the public space, shared it about, and it now has over 2,500 views on an unedited video with his face in full view. And if he had any semblance of sense, he would take this video down immediately. And that is why that I have blurred this face, because in the vain hope that he actually does take it down, I don't want a snippet of it to appear on my channel unedited, because I don't want to drag people down into the dirt. I don't want to wreck people's lives, because at the moment, that is very much the path he is on. That is what he is doing. He is destroying his prospects in the future. Now, you would have thought that this kind of content, a micronational leader making a Nazi salute in the public space and sharing it about, would receive some kind of condemnation from the people that view it. Not least communist micronations, surely. They are the polar opposite of neo-Nazis. They are ideological opposites, aren't they? That's what I'm constantly being told. And yet, there we have it. Literal praise for a Hitler wannabe. And Pangaria, the micronation that sent us those lovely emails, is likewise fully behind this particular individual. It doesn't take much for the mask to slip. It doesn't take much to see what communism is and what communist micronationalists are. Delusional fantasists with dreams of harming or controlling others. And although I shouldn't need to re-emphasize the ramifications of posting footage of yourselves marching around, goose-stepping, making Nazi salutes and whatever else in the public space, I think I probably have to. Communism is evil. Neo-Nazism is evil. Do not wreck your future prospects by posting this kind of footage of yourselves in the public space. Dissolve your micronation. Delete all of the accounts, scrub your name as best you can from these entities that you have associated yourself with, and if you absolutely have to, reinvent something, build something back up that is far more palatable. The micronational community at large tolerates, if not actively embraces, this kind of content, this kind of activity, and I cannot fathom why. It is not them that will suffer as a result of this. It is the individuals that engage in these kinds of activities. And for all of my very justified criticism of these particular individuals, I do seem to be the only one that actually cares. I do seem to be the only voice out here saying that this is not something that should be tolerated, it's not something that should be embraced, it's not something that should be encouraged in any shape or form. These individuals, in particular the younger members of the micronational community, should be actively dissuaded from going down this path. And quite why the micronational community, or even their parents, frankly, are not actively doing something about it, are not dissuading them from going down this route, is really beyond me. So I would like to finish off, very briefly, by saying to all the communist micronations out there, the neo-Nazi micronations out there, the fascist micronations out there, stop. Think about what you're doing before you ruin the rest of your life over something so ridiculous. If you want to learn more about Stomaria or play an active role in our development and expansion, visit our website at www.stomaria.com and find out what it means to be a Stomarian.